Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back. At this point, I'm hoping you've seen the first part of this video. As always, what you want to hear is given to you. That first part to the video regarding the right to travel, where it shows its origin being Article 4 of Article of Confederation, Magna Carta, and case laws that affirms the same. That first part of this video, there are two varying polarities of people or state of mind that will view it. First polarity will say, yeah, I knew it. Absolutely. The right to travel. I can move about without being hindered. And said interpretation of lack of hindrance would be, well, no need for a driver's license, no need for registration. That's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum will be people who say, oh, you're trying to justify people who say they don't have to use a driver's license. But regardless of what those two end of the polarity perceives that first part, at least they're now thinking. At least it's now been brought to the forefront of the mind. As mentioned in the text in that video, I'm not here to give you hope. I'm not here to be a friend. I'm not here to tell you things that's going to make you feel good. And it is absolutely irrelevant what you feel or how you think about what's being shown in these videos, regardless of whether you're on one end of the polarity or the other. Why? Those two polarity of perspectives are not even applicable in said circumstance when it comes to right to travel. Again, why is that? Why is it that the perspective that one construing right to travel as being equivalent to not requiring some type of license, whether the one you attach to a vehicle, car, automobile, call it whatever you want, or the one you attach to your person is called a driver's license? That's irrelevant. And it's also irrelevant for those harking and barking, saying, oh yeah, you do need a driver's license. Those two perspectives means nothing. They are as significant as much as the everyday man cares for the fart that comes out of their butt. Once that air leaves, they run away from it as much as possible and casually go mind their business. Those words from those two given perspective in that first part, when it comes to those two polarity of thoughts, is irrelevant. Because if you pay close attention to that first video, it says nothing about driver's license. It simply entertains what right to travel is. Yet, the problem lies in people's conclusory assertions. And then they come to a conclusion of something without substance or evidence of it. That, well, because right to travel exists, no driver's license is needed. Or some arbitrarily just say right to travel doesn't exist. Both of them are wrong. This is the primary issue when it comes to the subtleties and the small details that a lot of people suffer from. People have knowledge, especially in the age of technology. They're highly exposed to a lot of information. In fact, so much that it's a detriment to them. The problem is the small parts of the information itself are what people don't know. Therefore, people substitute the small part, aka the subtle things, within any given information that they are readily exposed to. They substitute it with things based on what they readily have bias for. Do not allow bias to be what qualifies you as being unintelligent, whether it be emotionally, logically, or spiritually. Remember, an erroneous thought is a fixed one. And the moment you are introduced to any given information and you take your own personal bias and how you personally feel and you throw it into the equation, you've then at that point corrupted the information and the knowledge itself that is supposed to benefit you. Now you're putting yourself into a self-directed hypnosis without even realizing it, because most people who are readily exposed to information are using it to their own detriment. And that is the key to why these videos are being made, to provide clarity. Again, those two polarities, where one says because the right to travel exists, therefore no form of license is required, and the other polarity where it says, well, right to travel doesn't even exist at all. Those two polarities are completely irrelevant. They are wrong. Here's why. That thing called right to travel says nothing about the issue of public trust. This was mentioned shortly in other videos when it comes to usufruct. That these public roads that people are using, they are built by municipalities. And then those municipalities have interest in it by way of repairing it and preserving it. And because they've done something to those public roads that everyone is using, they now evoke something called public trust. And a video was done on public trust, this video. And because of that interest that they have based on public trust, they now say, all right, everyone who uses this road, aka usufruct, and there are different types of usufruct, which we went over in the past. It's the reason why these increments are being done. If you don't comprehend certain foundations, when someone hands you some information, you'll use your bias of the foundation that you already have that's limited, and you use it to carry the wave of what you think the information is. Hence, videos such as that of usufruct and public trust are introduced first before things of this nature. Most people lack those basic foundation. If you don't know about how public trusts work, if you don't know about how usufructs work, then you don't know about how the world around you functions. Therefore, this thing where you say right to travel exists, which it does, but applied the wrong way would now be a problem, or ignored completely would also be an issue, because on the one end of the polarity, you're either completely ignoring that which is rightfully yours, and on the other end, you're misapplying. On the other end, there's a misapplication of that which rightfully belongs to you. That's an issue. An issue that the tortfeasors look at and get more comfortable and keep kicking your ass. Go watch those videos on usufruct and public trust so you know what those are for this to make sense. But we'll introduce what right to travel is, how res judicata, foundational substantive law, positive law, affirms such, whether one accepts it or not based on their own predominant bias of isolated information or lack thereof. Hopefully they grow. You don't want to stay stagnant. If something is introduced to you that conflict what you think you are holding on to, then the first thing you should do is pause or stop and question yourself as to why. Because there's always some truth behind that thing that you feel deep inside of you that seems like a conflict. Privileges and immunities clause. We read the fourth article in the fourth section of Articles of Confederation. We read the Magna Carta, and those two specific bodies of law uses specific term privilege. We're not going to go over it in this video again. An entire video was dedicated to it. The Privilege and Immunities Clause, United States Constitution, Article 4, Section 2, Clause 1. The same Article 4 within the 1791 ratified Constitution, which is a continuation of the Articles of Confederation, is also the same Article 4, to which the same principles relate to within the Articles of Confederation. Privilege and Immunity Clause prevents a state from treating citizens of other state in a discriminatory manner. When you read those laws we read in that first video, it lets you know that one man from one state can travel to the other because they have the right to travel in simplicity. Additionally, the right of interstate travel is associated with the clause. interstate relates to state of so-and-so, or these municipalities, which are body politics to their own, aka states to their own. All you law dictionary lovers, just go in there, go read the definition of state. Prior to ratification of Constitution. The clause is similar to a provision in Articles of Confederation. We just mentioned that because this clause in Article 4 of the United States Constitution that was ratified in 1791 is basically adopted from Article 4 of Articles of Confederation, which we read in the first part, and it's been reaffirmed here. The clause is similar to provisions in the Articles of Confederation, and it quotes, "The free inhabitants of each of these states, paupers, vagabonds, and fugitives, from justice excepted," and we explain and clarify this exception, "shall be entitled to privileges and immunities of free citizens in several states." When read in a much simpler version, it says the free inhabitants of each of these states shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of free citizens in the several states. Privilege and immunities clause. That is where this term comes in. Most legalese would have commas in them, just like any other regular sentence. These commas are bodies of preservation of laws that could preserve 5 to 6 different rights. Like that thing called First Amendment. It has about 7 things that it preserves beyond just religion and speech. And even speech extends to things like what you wear, the signs that you write, what you put on a piece of paper as to whether you're receiving or giving it, or what you put in form of writing, hieroglyphs, images, and other things, or the use of photography, etc., etc. That term press is not just limited to some big corporations that you see on TV, and so on and so forth. The right to practice religion is not limited to saying, hey, I am this, or I am not that. It also involves what you put on. That is a direct extension of said religion. In some religions, some women are required to cover their head. Some religions, some men are also. Some women or men are required to bear certain things. That's security of religion. Then it deals with right of association, etc., etc. Clauses are where rights are embedded within these languages of law. And what we just read, an article of association here, as it was in the first part of the video, which is reaffirmed in the same Article 4, but within the United States Constitution. When it comes to traveling, this clause is called Privilege and Immunities Clause. This thing called right to travel, which we showed in the first part of the video, is under this clause called Privilege and Immunities Clause. This thing called right to travel is considered privileges. The only ones that it applies to are those who are not fugitives. And the right to travel is a privilege. In other words, within the first part of the video, I mentioned that it is subject to other things in interpretation of case laws. Therefore, we began with what will make people feel comfortable as to the affirmation that yes, right to travel does exist. But before we go to that man-made law which interprets regress and ingress, which are privileges that are subject to interpretation and greater scrutinies than even rights are, let's go to given that privileges are subject to interpretation, here are other case laws that says, yeah, right to travel exists, but based on the public trust doctrine, those roads can be regulated. Now, here's a subtle, unspoken thing as to why that exists. It is as simple as this. No matter how private you think you are, meaning I'm going to move from one place to the other in my private properties without being bothered. Granted, there are many other scrutinies involved when it comes to the issue of trust itself, as to that registration, how you're supposed to do that properly when it comes to putting in your own trust and being a first lien holder. We've shown that on Patreon. We're not going to speak of that here. That's one thing. Let's just put that to the side and let's just say you have everything in line as to the security of papers, persons, effect. Effect being your rights. Effect being that thing you're carrying around. And properties being that thing you're also controlling, called car, vehicle, automobile. But let's just say you have that on point. And the presumption here is not that you're moving around gung-ho, assuming that you're merely going to rely on the phrase right to travel without any substance, why, or how. And if someone sues you, because that's what they do when they write you traffic citations, when someone sues you, do you know how to actually speak up beyond just using that catchphrase, that buzzword, right to travel? Right. In order for you to know it, you have to know the details involved in the opposing end as to why they're saying they're justified to do certain things. The hidden aspect of it is public trust doctrine and usufruct, which we've done videos on last year. So one watching this video that's been uploaded around May or June cannot say that they don't have enough time to first watch those prior videos, because they've been mentioned here over and over, and they were done months and months ago for foundational comprehension of these same things people say they have. Right to travel as its foundation, it is under privileges. You've heard what you wanted to hear, which is truthful and rightful. Whether you interpreted that based on your bias could be your problem. I'm here to show you the subtle substance of things, so that you at least now have the ability to make well-informed decisions, that it's not isolated based on how you feel against or for something. Because at the end of the day, how you feel for or against something is irrelevant, where incompetence is your compass. So use competence as your compass a little bit. And this is part of it. Police power. We're not here to say this is being abused or not. We're looking at the foundation of it. Something can only be abused when the one being abused allows it. And oftentimes the one being abused do not have the awareness of why they're being abused. And if they know why they're being abused, they don't know how to prevent it. So let's slowly get to the root of it. Remember, speaking about the right to travel and the fact that it was originated as a privilege, which is subject to interpretation. And that interpretation is based on two very simple things: public trust doctrine and usufruct. How those two principles of public trust doctrine and usufruct are enforced is through something called police power. Therefore, we have no choice but to look at police power before we go into the case law. In United States constitutional law, there are different types of law. There's contract law, there's estate law, there's trust law, there's business law, there's administrative law, etc., etc. And then there's constitutional law. In the United States constitutional law. So now you've seen that it's dealing with the foundation of things. The police power is the capacity of the states to regulate. The police power is the capacity of the states to regulate. Whenever any municipal, city of, village of, borough of, police department members approaches you, they're oftentimes enforcing what they consider the state law. In other words, they're acting as agency of the state. Most municipalities, if not all of them, are permitted by the constitution of said state to exist. And most of their charters are on the Secretary of State level. And it will tell you on the face of their charters that they have the ability to become a municipal corporation according to such and such section of the Constitution. vicariously, allowing them to be an agent of the state, or at least they purport to do so, without anyone challenging it. How can you ever go to the root of a problem that's being used against you if you don't know how it exists, why it exists, how it's supposed to exist, or interface with you? This is the core of the issue most people ignore before they start running into some stuff like right to travel. And just as a checkpoint, you can get all of this done successfully using international law. And no, we're not speaking about human rights, even though human rights does affirm right to move from one country to the other, and right to move about from one place to the other. But what we're speaking about is the law when it comes to international driver's permit and international driver's license. That's on Patreon. We're not going to speak about that over here. But that solution exists. Pair that up with the ability to put your vehicle in a trust and be the first lien holder, then you can begin to enforce right to travel. But here are the basics. Police power is the capacity and the ability to do something of the states to regulate behavior, such as people moving about and using public road that they, based on public law, have built and maintained. So now they have interest in it as trustees of it, to regulate how that thing that they've built and constantly maintain for those people to use it. Pay attention to these details now. Police power is the capacity of the state to regulate behavior and enforce order within their territory for the betterment of the health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the inhabitant. This last portion, which is the purpose, where it says for the betterment of, and it lists all these different attributes when it comes to human activities. This last portion is precisely what you call public trust doctrine, aka for the betterment of health, safety, morals, and general welfare of their inhabitants. This is the stance they're coming from. Again, we're not saying whether they're using this principle properly or not. But for you to be able to begin to speak about whether something is being used properly or not, you have to know why it exists, how it affects you, and how it's being used. Most don't know these basics. Police power is defined in each jurisdiction by the legislative body, which determines the public purpose. See this word public here? They just determine trust here. When you do something for the purpose of someone else, you're a trustee, aka for the betterment of health, safety, morals, and general welfare. And whose safety, whose health, whose general welfare? They tell you a little bit after that in the next sentence. The public. And the ones who puts it in black and white, which is the invincible strings that attach human activity, is called the legislature, the language of the law. The legislative body creates it, called the Congress of any given state. You must know these foundations, which determines the public purposes. The purpose is what we've read up here, that need to be served by legislation. What would the Congress, aka legislative body, create, aka legislation, for the purpose, aka public trust of welfare, health, and safety, to be, quote, served for the purpose of the public? Under the 10th Amendment of the United States, the powers not delegated to federal government are reserved to the states or to the people. This portion is the reason why I'm actually reading police power. This portion, where the 10th Amendment reserves the power to you, is the important part. Yes, public trust exists, but ultimately, you have reserved your right to be able to do certain things if it's not right, which you can merge with right of redress and grievance. Pay attention to these details, because where the problem exists, so does the solution. This implies that the federal government does not possess all possible powers because most of these are reserved to the state governments, which they use the legislation of these state government by way of the legislative body called the Congress. They use it against most people. Most don't even read their state legislatures. Some of these state legislatures, called general laws, public act, public law, Senate bills, the slips, so and so, before it's statutized. Most of these things are actually unconstitutional, but no one is challenging it as such. That is a problem. And while the 10th Amendment reserves a lot of power to state government, it also reserves others to the people, aka you. This police power is what the state of so-and-so has extended to your local municipalities for those police departments to act as its agent, to regulate the use, aka usufruct, of these public roads that these municipalities get grants from the state of so-and-so Congress to build these roads. Have you ever wondered all those asphalt and all those oil they put on the road and things like that? Do you know where all those monies are coming from? And do you ever read the municipalities' minutes and agendas of your local municipality to see where they're getting the monies to hire these contractors to build those roads? You have to know these things. They're immediately around you every day. The money funnels from the state level, and in some cases privately, to these municipalities to build these roads, and by virtue of that, they're extended the state police power to regulate their use based on public trust, aka for the purpose of safety and general welfare. That's the stance they're coming from. We're not here to say it's being used properly or not. Again, you have to know where they are coming from for you to know whether what you're claiming can be maneuvered one way or another. Again, most don't know this. They make conclusions without knowing the foundation of it. That is an issue. So now that we know what police power is, now that we know that right to travel does exist, now that we know which laws affirm it, now that we know that it's based under the Privilege and Immunities Clause, now let's go into the language of legislature, which might not fit into a lot of people's small, tiny little box. But fairness is important. The first part shows you which one affirms right to travel. Your interpretation as to whether it applies to licensing or not is completely separate matter. And that separate matter is dealing with usufruct and public trust, which we're going to be dealing with herein. Just as we showed case law in the first video, let's show this other one now. Harvey versus Weld, CNT.DIST. Attorney. Civil Action 12 CV 00966-DMB. It is a valid exercise of the state's police power. Remember, we just read what police power is. See, there's two words that make up a term. It's based on two things, public trust and usufruct. Very important to know. One without that foundational knowledge will just read this and interpret what they think police power is. It is a valid exercise of the state's police power to require all persons who operate motor vehicles on state highways to possess a valid driver's license. Simple, straightforward, cutthroat. You might want to define motor vehicle based on some federal statute. But if you look closely at this, it tells you about states. And it tells you earlier, as we've read, that police power deals directly with the legislature of the state because the power of such is reserved to the state and you. If you're not looking at your state legislature as to the definition and applicability of motor vehicle, and you're stuck on some motor vehicle language on a federal level, you are still lying to yourself. You might not be doing it with the awareness that you're doing so. Hence, videos like these – join the clarity of what applies and what doesn't. When it comes to the regulation of driver's license, it's a state tool, not a federal one. Therefore, state law is applicable to it. Therefore, if you're trying to use language of some United States code to determine what, quote, motor vehicle is, you are now completely steering away from the direction you ought to be looking at. You know, many people go years after years after years with a wrong conceived notion, applying it to something completely different like right to travel. You know how many people have gotten into so much deep shit because of lack of sufficient information or the misapplication of information. Information is supposed to benefit you, not be a detriment to you. It is a valid exercise. Why? Because of public trust and usufruct of the state's police power to require all persons who operate motor vehicle on state highways to possess a valid driver's license. Keep in mind here, they're not telling you about state driver's license. They're saying valid driver's license. It is now up to you to learn certain laws when it comes to driver's license that favors you. Again, that's a patron. It's not going to be put up here. Summary. For those who are gung-ho with their isolated perspective that right to travel doesn't exist at all, or that because it does, it applies to things such as usufruct and public trust, aka licensing, both of those polarity of thoughts are useless. They are irrelevant. But more so, you must comprehend the origin of right to travel, the fact that since it's a privilege, it's subject to interpretation, and that interpretation is based on something called public trust and usufruct, which is embedded into police power that exists on a state level. The issue with most people dealing with these things is they're looking at USCs to determine the definition of motor vehicle, but they're not even looking at their state legislature. And even when they do so, you will see hints that tell you, look, you can have any type of license so long as it is valid. In other words, some laws back it up. Don't be carrying around some fake crap, hoping to convince someone into your delusion. Actually use the laws. But once you get the foundational principles, those with a bigot state of mind, or those who are just, on the other hand, gung-ho, doing things halfway, if you're being truthful to yourself, you will get the clarity of where to go. You will begin to get the clarity of how this thing actually works. Start from there. Again, as always, no one owes you time. No one owes you explanation. No one owes you anything. The least I can do for you is to show you these basic foundations, and you take it from there. You use your discernment as an intelligent creature to know how to handle your own affairs. As an intelligent creature, to first be honest and truthful to yourself, because only through that will knowledge and wisdom reveal itself to you. And after all that, realize that no one owes you anything. Until next time, take care. Best of luck. I have a Patreon page, and I'm inviting you to come join. For you interested in discharge, we show everything about how it's done and my own experience. Consistent posts are made explaining many things regarding said discharge. Many will seek and simply wouldn't find. Those dealing with mortgage issue or want to know more about it, we speak of it. For those dealing with basic stuff like traffic issues, we speak about the solution, and I show it from my own experiences and how I permanently prevent any such issues. Those worrying about trust, different types of trust, we go over so many things consistently. Regarding trust, we show the IRS manuals. Those who are interested in suing and making money through debt collection or other means, we go over it, we show it. I show my own settlement checks and the things that I've done as a personal experience. Those interested in banking, we show subtle details and intricacies of the things that I have learned. For those interested in other things like the IRS forms and how to put it to use, we show it, explain the details. For those interested in court-related matters and intricacies, we always show it. For those interested in the spiritual aspect of things and how it works, we show and explain it. Those with child support matters. We explain and we show everything in detail also. Great puzzle pieces that can never be found in other social media platforms. But we explain it all as it relates to many different things for those interested in express trusts and the issue of how not qualifying for taxation, which I call dinking, how it relates to any other type of trust or any other affairs, and how you can intertwine your affairs into the different types of discharge that exist and lack of qualification for taxation. Speak about it. The truth about really recusing attorneys and the whole foreign agent registration and attorney lawyer number, we speak about it. Speak about how to really bring about juries, and some of the comment section asks good questions and greater answers are given. Speak about how to get and use tax exemptions for vehicle use and sales. You don't have to belong to some organization. You can actually get yours according to the language of the legislature within your state. Go over the details that a lot of people mentor about regarding Article 1, Article 3. What really makes a court? It's not limited to just your paperwork. Most people don't know. We go over business matters for those with actual businesses, S Corp, C Corp, LLCs, those who are business minded and those who make monies. Go over other things that a lot of people don't know functions internationally. We speak about a lot of other spiritual related matters. Details on how to bring criminal charges, what it truly means to bring criminal charges, what a bill of particulars is, how to recuse a judge, details of the parliamentary rules in court and legislature, different things about standard of evidence and burden of proof, different things that a lot of people will speak of. Discovery. But did you know there are 6 types of discoveries? You know how to intertwine your LLCs and S Corps with an express trust, how to not make them taxable. Do you know when Trinity versus Pagliaro really is involved? Do you know how to use your home as a home office? And the many details involved. Go over the injunction and how to enforce the different types of injunctions that exist. The intricacies of how data brokers exist and how they steal information. Not just the credit bureaus, but many data brokers and how you can prevent them. We go over grants, getting grants. We go over issues and solutions of CPN and how they're created. There are about 6 or 4 to 5 different parts that were created. Go over caveats where people say sue them, but they don't really know. Go over the things to do after you sue them. We go over the issues of privacy and technology. All the whole thing about perfection of security interest, UCC, and how to use it and how to monetize the birth certificate, all that. We go over the details. There are a lot of principles and doctrines people don't know about that we go over. Go over how to really do the copyright and details involved in it. Go over how to simply do a trademark. It's far more easier than you think. All these people telling you go to a trademark office, do this, write this letter. It's not that difficult. Go over how to fill out the GSA bond box at a time, and so many more. How to get settlement checks, how to put your vehicle in a trust. I show you from my own experiences, form for form, step by step. Go over the different types of relief to be granted. The type of relief you seek invokes the type of jurisdiction that you fall under. All these people speaking about chancery, equity, at law, common law. The relief that you seek is directly tied to the type of jurisdiction. Go over the CPN, how it's created. Go over how to obtain bonds, where to do it. Go over the different types of discharge and some more. We explain each of those types of discharge. We explain how trademark and copyright is affiliated with asset protection. We go over how to prove trust. We go over the different types of fraud. We go over the importance that many people will never know. So many more. I show my own experiences in the audio calls from court cases of how I get different types of settlement checks. Go over the different types of discharge. There's so much more that it can't even completely be spoken of here regarding trust. We go over how to create it step by step, and many more things that will never be shown on YouTube or any other platforms. Go over all the principles that people don't know about. And they speak about statute of limitation. Well, fraud does have a statute of limitation, but do you know how to subvert it? As to why that phrase fraud has no statute of limitation to bring it to life, most people don't know. There's so many things that we speak about. We speak about how to garnish people's checks and people's property. There's a form that you use for that. People don't know about it. Speak about details regarding foreign trustees. Speak about spiritual related matters. And on the Instagram page, if you get to join, come on over. There's also a Facebook page where questions and answers are posted and other reminder links to certain videos are shown. Until next time, take care. Best of luck.